Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to my channel where I talk about how to heal chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue energetically through emotional healing. Healing our past wounds that were unconscious for much of our lives. Now is our job to make the unconscious conscious, and then heal it with spiritual and psychological practices that I talk about on this channel. Well, today I'm talking about that theoretically, there is only one thing that you need to know in order to heal from a chronic illness. I mean, okay, well, hold the phone, because how could that be true? How could that possibly be that there's only one thing that you needed to know to heal a chronic illness? Well, what's crazy is that the longer I am on this process of healing chronic illness, symptoms, ailments, etc., and the more that I get into astrology and the more that I get into my spiritual practices, the more that I see that this is true. This is true. This is the one thing that you need to know to heal a chronic illness. And that is that the universe works in metaphors. And I'm talking about everything. Everything works in metaphors. Everything that is beyond our control works in metaphors. And that includes our unconscious and our bodies. Our unconscious is our body. So let me explain what I mean, because this is huge. This is huge. What if the only thing that you need to know in order to heal yourself is that the universe works through metaphors? So what could I possibly mean by this? So this whole thing goes back to something that I've spoken about a bunch of times on the channel. This concept of using your symptoms as a roadmap to discover your unconscious wounds. So if you have a chronic illness that is energetically based, that is energetically caused, and I personally believe that every chronic illness has at least some component of energetic cause or energetic contribution. And to me, when I speak of energy, the biggest influence on energy is our emotional past or our emotional body. So our emotional body has a huge influence on maybe all, like a huge influence on our energetic being. So if we know that our chronic illness has energetic components that are emotionally based, then the question is, what are the emotions? What are the wounds that we're not conscious that we have? What are the wounds? What are the beliefs? What are the pain points in our bodies that are creating symptoms and illness, that are creating physical dysfunction in our bodies? How do we do that? Well, we use our symptoms as a map to those things. How do we do that? The answer is through metaphors. You use metaphor and symbols to figure out what a symptom and what an illness is trying to tell you. This is another way of speaking about the approach that I take to healing, which is the soul-centered approach. Looking through your illness and looking through your symptoms through the lens of your soul. It's a similar concept to the metaphor. So you just say to yourself, if this symptom was a metaphor, what would it be saying? You can do the same thing with the soul. If my soul was trying to send me a message through this symptom, what would it be trying to tell me? What's crazy is the answer that you get, the guess that you have, the thought that you have, the intuition that you have about the answer is usually dead on, or at least close. That's what's crazy. That's what's crazy, is that this actually works as a method of finding those unconscious beliefs. So let's use an example. Let's talk about a symptom. One of the ones that was really profound for me was about this being cold all the time. So that came with my chronic fatigue syndrome, that I was cold all the time. But it wasn't just cold, it was bone cold. It was like, I am frozen. I felt frozen from the inside out. It was like once I got cold, I couldn't get uncold. Like I couldn't warm up again. It took so much, and it was weird because it didn't matter how many layers I put on. It's like my body wasn't emitting body heat. Well, the reason blankets work is not because the blanket's emitting heat. It's because you're emitting heat and you're containing it. It's not being dissipated. It's being contained in the blanket. It can't escape. Well, what if your body's not making any body heat? Then the blanket doesn't work. You don't get any warmer. So in order to warm up, I have to be like soaked in an external source of heat, whether that's from the sun or a hot shower, hot bath, a sauna, a space heater, whatever it is. It had to be an external source of heat because it was like there was no heat coming out from my body. My body like wasn't making any heat, so I was freezing all the time. I still get bone chilled, but it is so much less frequent, and it's as I heal. So, okay, well, let's think about the metaphor of that. What's the metaphor there? So if my soul was trying to send me a message through this symptom, what would it be saying? What would it be saying? If being cold was a metaphor, what would it be saying? The one that I came up with is what it actually turned out to be. The metaphor is that I am frozen, that there are parts of me that are frozen, literally frozen. My energetic being is literally frozen. I am in the freeze state, that a part of me is perpetually frozen. Or it would often happen when I had a trigger, some emotion was triggered and I was not conscious of what emotion that was. I started to have these other symptoms as well, but cold was always there. I would always start getting bone chill before I even got ooh, I have goosebumps, I'm chilly. I didn't get chilly, I just would gradually but quickly get cold from my insides, like from my blood. Like cold was running through my veins. It's like I'm freezing from the inside out. So there's something inside of me that is frozen. Well, over time, what I learned was that was actually the case. That there is a part of me that is in the freeze response, the nervous system freeze response. That freeze response was named for a reason. You are frozen. There's a part of you, there's a part of me that was in the freeze state, which is a trauma response to a certain emotion. Now, later I learned that that emotion was fear, that I was responding to fear and vulnerability for one reason or another, and that's another story of what the story was that was causing that emotion and that pain. But it was that metaphor of creating, I was literally frozen. This is a metaphor because I'm not actually frozen, but there is a part of me that is in the freeze state perpetually. There's a part of me that's frozen. And that's the key. So you do this for all of your symptoms. Let's do thinning hair. Thinning hair, for example, related to this illness. You can do a metaphor like, if this was a metaphor, what would it mean? Well, what do we hear causes hair loss? Why do people lose their hair? Well, aren't there expressions about people pulling their hair out when they're stressed or losing their hair when they're terrified? Yes, there are. So I am in a perpetual state of fear. And I keep pointing here because this is this area is part of where the hair loss has happened. So the hair loss is like, there's a part of me that is perpetually scared and stressed. Perpetually scared and stressed. That's what causes a chronic symptom. Something that won't go away, that is there for a long period of time. We could talk about constipation. What's the metaphor there? You're literally holding on to something. You quite literally cannot let something go. I am holding on to something that is not serving me anymore, that I'm holding on, that I can't let go. I can't let go of something. What about stomach distension in the abdomen? Like serious stomach distension. What's the metaphor there? Well, what's funny is when I look in the mirror at my distended stomach, I see what looks very similar to a pregnant woman. What I looked like when I was 5-6 months pregnant. What's the metaphor there? The metaphor is a pregnant belly. My stomach is pregnant with my inner child. My inner child is upset, is distressed. I'm a pregnant woman, a mother holding a child that's not actually in existence. There's no baby being formed in there. Then what's in there? It's my inner child. It's my inner child that needs to heal. So now I've learned over time, when that happens, when my stomach becomes very distended, I know immediately that's my inner child talking to me. I look pregnant. That's the metaphor. This is time for me to become the mother for that inner child, whatever she's feeling. She's not feeling taken care of. She's not feeling seen. She wants me to see her. She's needing to be seen. I mean, this works. It's amazing. This is like the first step where you can start after calming the nervous system, which I'm creating a course on that will be linked down below when that's ready. That's the first foundational step to all of this. You don't want to start emotional work until you learn how to calm the nervous system, because calming the nervous system is how you learn how to get back in touch with your body, how to learn to listen to your body, and how to regulate your emotions with your breath so that you don't get overwhelmed by your emotions at any point or flooded by emotion, because that can cause more damage. So once you calm the nervous system and you've reset the nervous system to be in a parasympathetic state, the next thing is, well, now I want to, go into the emotional stuff. So where do I start? I start looking at the individual symptoms of the illness or the illness altogether. So chronic fatigue syndrome. If chronic fatigue were a metaphor, what would it be? The thing that I've come up with was literally a giant weight has been on you. And it's just been growing and growing and growing. Like, because what makes a person feel heavy and exhausted and fatigued? If it were a literal thing, it would be having a tremendous amount of weight pushing you down, holding you down, pulling you down. That's the metaphor I come up with, that you have a giant weight on you. But that's a metaphor because it's not literal. You don't have sacks on you. You don't have hundreds of pounds of weight on you in a literal sense. It's a metaphor because you have an energetic weight on you, a huge energetic weight on you. It's an emotional weight. When I had chronic fatigue, I had a tremendous amount of unprocessed emotion, unprocessed pain, unseen emotion and unseen pain in my body that was trapped in there. And it was creating a giant weight on my body. So that what happened? I became literally weighted down. My limbs were extremely heavy. You know what this feels like. If you have chronic fatigue, you know what it feels like. Everything gets bogged down. It's like you have a giant weight on you that you're carrying and carrying and carrying and carrying. And with every passing year, it gets heavier. And that is the function of unprocessed pain and unprocessed wounds and trauma, especially because when you have early childhood trauma, like attachment trauma is the kind of trauma that influences every relationship you have in the world. The way you relate to everything, whether that's people, places, things, yourself. Attachment trauma is the one that just is like spread through everything and it affects everything. So as you go through your life, if you have unhealed attachment trauma, you go through your life and you are interacting, you have relations with all these people, places, things, and yourself. And you are living out that pain unconsciously. And you are getting feedback that is feeding that trauma. Because that's how the law of attraction works. The things that trigger us and the things that put more into that pain bucket will go in, because that pain is stuck in your body, and so it's going to attract more of that. So over time, we're piling more and more and more and more and more and more into that wound. It's getting bigger, it's getting worse because of that dynamic. And so chronic fatigue, most people don't get chronic fatigue when they're 5. Even if the trauma happened when they were 1 or 2. It happens from over time. It usually happens when people are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. More people older tend to have chronic fatigue. I was fairly young when I got it. I developed it when I was about 23. That was fairly young. Most people develop it in the later decades because of this dynamic. Over time, it's just piling up. So it takes time to get to the point of developing an illness that can be diagnosed. So that's the metaphor. There's a giant weight on you, a giant emotional weight on you. This metaphor idea works. This is the first place you start in emotional healing, in my opinion. Whether you want to think about it as a metaphor or whether you think about it like coming through a soul message. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. If it's a message from your soul, what would it be saying to you? Or if it was a metaphor, what would it be telling you? This is that first step, because this will lead you to where the wounds are, what they are about, what they have to do with, what are the things that we need to start paying conscious attention to. This is the big step of how you make the unconscious conscious. We're translating through metaphor and symbol, we're translating our physical symptoms, which is our unconscious, into concepts, into conscious concepts, so that we can become conscious of the dynamics that are happening in our body that are creating those wounds, that are creating those symptoms. This is the start of the process. And so once you start to become conscious of those things, that's key. That is like the huge step, because once you become conscious, you can then create space in yourself, start cultivating this practice of holding compassionate space and trying to understand, using curiosity of, wow, okay, like tell me more. Tell me more. This is fascinating. What is this? Where did this come from? Where could I have gotten this? What dynamic of my childhood could have created this? Then you start to speak about it. You hold space in your head for it. And then once you're conscious of it to this metaphor level, then through your life, you start getting more insights onto it. It's like, oh, wow, this triggered this wound. That's interesting. This symptom got worse when I did this. That's interesting. Why could that be? How could that be? So that cultivating this energy of curiosity is like the next step, because then you start getting more information. And eventually, where you're going to get to is the universe is going to bring something in for you, and you're going to have a big emotional release. And it's your job to be the present, loving adult for the child self that is crying, that is releasing this emotion, so that you can have distance from it, but also enough attachment to be able to purge those tears, but also be detached enough so that you're not identified with that emotion. Now, I'm going over this other stuff, that like the later steps, quickly, because that's not the focus of this video. The focus of this video is that metaphor, because that is the key. What if the answer to healing chronic illnesses is one key concept, and that's this. The metaphor, that the universe works in metaphors. You know what's crazy on us as a side note, and I mentioned astrology in the beginning, because my practice of astrology and my learning of astrology has reinforced this in a really intense, profound way, and it's just like prodding me on that the truth of this, that the universe works in metaphors. The more you learn astrology, the more you realize the reason that astrology works is because of symbols and archetypes and metaphors. The crazy thing about astrology is that it shouldn't work. It shouldn't work, but it works. Why do people continue to become astrologers, even though it's like in many ways nonsensical? Like it doesn't make any sense, like why it works. It's because it works. That's why people keep becoming astrologers, is because it just works. And then the fun becomes, well, why does it work? And how can we learn it the best we can to use it to help us grow and change and evolve and know ourselves? In my opinion, every spiritual practice, the goal is to know ourselves and to learn unconditional love for ourselves. And finding the magic and the beauty in life is one way that I personally love to do that. That's part of my spiritual practice, is finding the beauty and the magic that I never used to believe in. I never used to believe that stuff. But the reason astrology works is because the universe works in metaphors. If the universe works in metaphors, then our bodies work in metaphors. Our unconscious works in metaphors. And that's why this works. And it's just like astrology. This shouldn't work. It doesn't make any sense, because I was not consciously making metaphors when I created these. I was not consciously thinking, when my beliefs and my unprocessed pain became symptoms, I was not making metaphors to, okay, well, if this was a symptom, what would it be? And then I'm going to embed it in the body right here. No, that was not what was happening. It's the unconscious. So the unconscious works through metaphors. I mean, it's like, I keep saying it over and over again because it actually still blows my mind. Even though I'm so used to this concept and I use it constantly, and I've used it again and again, and this was a huge breakthrough in my own healing journey, and it can be helpful to you. This is the key. My suggestion would be to make a list of all of your symptoms in one column, and in the other column, write some options of like what first comes to your mind. And it might not be the first one that works. You might end up doing some modification of those things later on, but just start to think, if this was a metaphor, what would it be? If this symptom was a metaphor, what would it be saying? what would the metaphor be? And it works. It's crazy, but it works. Start to do that, because that is like the big key in how to begin to make the unconscious conscious without a bunch of therapy. Yay! Make the unconscious conscious by using metaphors. It's so simple. It's not easy. Healing is not easy, but this is like such a simple concept that actually works. It's incredible. So I highly recommend that you do this. Write down, or just at least start thinking about it or talking about it. But I really encourage, if you write it down, it really grounds the energy. It grounds the idea. It'll stick more, for me at least. So you just write down each one of your symptoms and what the metaphor could be. That's a huge step in making the unconscious conscious, which eventually leads to the healing. Because once it's conscious, once it's in your conscious mind, the universe will eventually, once you cultivate an energy of loving space and compassion, non-judgment of that energy of whatever is coming up, whatever you're realizing and becoming conscious of, the universe will put something in your path at some point, whether that's an astrological shift or whether it's an emotional trigger that comes into your life. Eventually, might take days, might take weeks. For me, it often takes months to get that emotional release of like tears and vibrations, and having a successful release of that energy while holding the loving space. The universe will put that there. Once you make the unconscious conscious and then create that loving space for it and maintain that loving space for extended period of time. Like you just have to hold that accepting loving presence for the pained part of you. So healing chronic illnesses, the energetic part of a chronic illness, this is key. It's just key. Okay, I hope this was helpful on your healing journey. I hope you're doing well out there, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. And I will see you on the next video. Take care. Bye.